Well, how we could start, just a brief synopsis of, what you were doing at the time, your position, so forth, and then as much detail as possible, when you first heard, well, okay, what you first saw when they broke in, what you were thinking,
First to begin with,
sure,
I was at The Guardian.
You're The Guardian, okay.
Yes.
Sure.
So, are we ready? You counting me down or just start? Okay. So, where I was being buffed by the production manager of The Guardian. Not in my capacity, I was the first picture editor of the paper, but that was not the capacity I was being buffed in. I had been working on a revamp of their Sunday magazine. This was really in the early days of pagination. And we had made the grave error of designing the revamp of the Sunday magazine based on what we were seeing on screen, as opposed to hard specifying the type. So the fonts were all over the place. It was really bad. He was telling us this is never going to win. We can't publish this. We can't. It wasted all the paper and so on. And then the whole building rocked. And we were like, wow, earthquake. And then somebody said, no, there's a fire. And we looked outside the window, which was, of course, looking north at the time from The Guardian. Remember, there was no National Museum at the time, so it was a straight line to the old police station, old police headquarters, as well as a direct line to the Red House. And we saw the smoke. And then we began hearing pop, 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 pop shots and so on. And somebody said, So I went to a window that overlooked, I think that's Shaken Street. No, it's not Shaken Street. Edward Street, I think it is. And looked out there and saw a car with a trunk open and people taking weapons out of it.
What were the people wearing?
Some people had on bandanas, some people were unmasked. So I did the insane thing, which is, of course, to grab my camera bag. And I went out the back door. Francis Joseph, who was the news reporter, went out through the front door. And there's a whole story about Francis, Super Fran, and all of that happened afterwards. But I went out the back door. And I walked out the back door, and a Muslim man pointing a rifle at me and said, no pictures. I remember it very clearly. It's amazing how small the muzzle of a rifle is when you're staring down it. And I thought, I just shrugged and I was like, okay. And I returned, I went back inside.
What were you thinking at this moment?
I remember I looked up and the late Terry Joseph was up on the street corner and he was doing this sort of wheel and turn again gesture with his hands. We were good friends, so I said, okay, fine. I turned and I walked back inside. And then they shut up all the glass on that side. That was the glass to the press room. Went back inside, gathered my thoughts for a minute, and then went to the window, the north-facing window of The Guardian, and began taking photographs. Put on a long lens, began taking photographs. And this was, of course, my great tragedy of that evening was that I shot 2 rolls of film. Of people scampering, people running, people limping down the street, bursts of automatic fire and so on. You just see the flashes. It was dusk. The smoke coming out of the building and so on. And I gave them to a photographer who is dead now, so I'm not going to drag his name into this. But I gave it to him. I said, process these 2 rolls of film for me so I can see what we have. And he processed the film and fixed it, because he was panicked and he was also a little tipsy. Well, he was a heck of a lot more than a little tipsy. It was Friday afternoon. He was well into his cups. So what he brought me back, and he was actually trembling with fear now, was perfectly clear film. Because that's what happens when you run it through the fixer without developing it. You get perfectly clear film.
So you ruined
Absolutely, irredeemably. So I sat there and I looked at it and I thought, okay then. And then I got a call from the back gate again to say that there were people who were asking for me. It was Kamini Mirage and Alva Vera, who were from the Express. And there were people running up and down the place and there's shots of gunfire and smoke and so on and sirens wailing. And they were saying, can we come in? And I was like, well, I mean, it's not my house, but I mean, these are people I know, so I said yes, we went in. The army had arrived by then. And this is all happening in a mad rush at the same time and so on. So the army wanted to set up a position on the roof. So they were up there setting up the position. So I went up there with Alva and Kamini. And I shot a photograph. By now it's well past dusk, so it's just early night, of the flames rising up over the police headquarters, the old police headquarters. And that went into the next day's paper. Actually, I don't think it's a paper the next day, there was a paper the day after that. It was the only time that we skipped a publication entirely because there was simply nobody there to run the presses. What was kind of remarkable about that whole experience was that I used to ride a motorcycle then, so I used to park down in the basement. And I rode out after doing all of that and processing. I processed that second roll of film myself. Mrs. Mills was really upset with me because I had led strangers into the newsroom. And I said, Mrs. Mills, there are people being shot at in the street. She said, yes, but as soon as they can leave, they must leave. She was very stern about her newsroom. So I got the film processed, things quieted down, it seemed as if we could go. This was around 9 in the night or so. Kamini and Alva left, and I rode out on my motorcycle. And it was really the most surreal thing because there were the flames, there was the flashing lights and so on of police vehicles passing by. There were all kinds of people walking up and down the street, some of them carrying stuff on their backs, and I was just riding past this.
What were they carrying?
Boxes and looting. There was stuff they'd looted.
What are you thinking, seeing people stealing stuff at this time?
Sorry?
No, what are you thinking about seeing people during this crazy time, people are looting and stealing stuff and so forth?
Well, they're not doing it 100 feet away from where I used to work, so that is, of course, a matter of concern, but it's not a matter of direct concern the way it was then. So I went home, and Mrs. Mills was in touch with us, and we decided we would come back in at midday the next day. The police had secured, well, the army had secured the space. And I went back in on the evening, I think, of the Saturday when we began working on the Sunday paper. I was a very skinny paper, but I provided them with my photographs and so on. And it was a very unusual time because you could leave, but you didn't really want to be out and about because the whole set of circumstances was very uncertain. I think the scariest thing about it for me was at one point we went to a press conference and I went with Carl Jacobs as the photographer, and there were a couple of other people who came along. I can't remember who else, but I remember going with Carl. And we were walking. We walked the streets because it was what was then the Holiday Inn. And we walked to the Holiday Inn, now it's the Radisson. And I remember walking down the street and looking at all these little boys. They were men. They were in the army with these enormous weapons who were looking for something to shoot. And I have to tell you that I was more scared of them at that point than I was of anybody else.
Why is that?
Because they really wanted to shoot something. They were upset, they were annoyed, and I was not 100% certain about their value judgments at that point. So I had a lot of concerns about that, particularly since I'd spent some time on the roof of the Guardian with the army guys. And they had a weapons-free directive. They didn't have to account for bullets. They were just to shoot. And I saw bullets being discharged at a remarkable rate.
What were they shooting at?
Anything that showed itself in the windows of the Red House. We had a picture called the hot window, where occasionally people would stick a gun out and fire. They shot up the face of the Guardian, the north face of it, because of course there was that direct line with the Red House. There was a lot of crawling around on the ground because you couldn't really take the chance of walking in front of the windows. There was a lot of sleeping under desks. And the thing that I remember most clearly is there was a tremendous amount of corned beef. The Anson Macau group, who owned The Guardian, were aware that there were people there and they couldn't leave and so on. So they went to their warehouses and they brought food for us. It was canned food, tin food, and people would cook and so on. So, my neighbors stayed there for days at a time. And it was corned beef, just corned beef. There was corned beef casserole, there was corned beef salad, there were corned beef sandwiches. I couldn't eat corned beef for 5 years after the coup because it was just corned beef every single day. A lot of the time I was waiting, trying to understand what was going on. My next really clear recollection of it was the evening of the surrender, when we went to TTT. I remember parking at what was then known as Casuals Club. It's now an empty lot. At the curve in the Savannah, when you turn, heading up by the Savannah, you turn west to go up by Queen's Hall. Not Queen's Hall, sorry, Queen's Royal College. And I parked somewhere there and I walked down to Maraval Road and the rain began to fall. And it fell. And it fell. So throughout this whole process of surrendering, of the people coming out and laying down all the weapons in a big pile in the middle of the street, photographing Abu Bakr, his lieutenants, all the people coming out, being patted down by the police and led into a bus. I was soaked completely through. It was a major historical moment, but I was so wet. Down there, you're feeling the tips of your socks wet and so on. But everybody was there. All the international media, much better prepared than we were. They had big raincoats, they had plastic sheeting for their cameras and so on. But we just shot the stuff.
How did you shoot with all that rain?
A lot of the time the camera was just held underneath my shirt. I was keeping it in shirt to keep the rain directly off it. But when it was time to shoot, you shot. Because, you had to take the pictures. Yes, you worried about the camera, but you shot. I'm kind of strobing through this, but my last memory of that was getting a call about 3 years later. I'd taken about 2 or 3 souvenir pictures, one of the burning building, one of Abu Bakr surrendering, his hands over his head, being patted down and so on. And every single one of my negatives had disappeared from The Guardian. It was the most remarkable thing. Within 3 years, they were all gone. Nobody knows what happened to them, they just disappeared. But all my work from that era is gone. The only pictures that are left now are the pictures that I said, okay, fine, let me do a scan of the picture and send it back for you. Because really, it's your property. I shot it while I was your employee. So I think it's something that's it. If there's anything else about the experience that you'd like to ask me about, but mostly I was at The Guardian, going out occasionally for press conferences and so on. But there was very, very limited ability to move around. You couldn't walk up and down the street. You went to a place with a purpose and people were aware that you were going to that place during that time. When it got locked down very, very firmly. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, during this, you're out there, in this whole situation. I'm wondering, friends, family, was anybody like, Mark, why you think be out of this, stay, why are you out there, putting yourself at risk?
I think by then people had resigned themselves to the fact that this is what I did. This was an extreme version of what I did. But I don't think, and no one really said, do you want to be doing this? Because that was kind of a pointless question. Clearly I'm doing it because I'm doing it. Some of the folks did not come out either because they couldn't get there, they couldn't get transportation, they weren't inclined to. The Guardian, I remember at the time, operated for about 5 or 6 days with about 20 to 30% of its complement of staff. because those were the people who were there and who could come out and who decided they were going to do that. But there wasn't any question about, am I going to do this? I wasn't terribly excited about it. I was like, wow, this is an amazing experience. I want to have this experience. But I was there. It was my job. I was the picture editor. I was the most senior person in the photographing department. So, this is what I signed up for. It wasn't precisely that I signed up for, but that was the job at the time. I probably was in shock, to be honest. I don't remember being scared, but I don't remember being terribly enthusiastic about the experience either. It was just, okay, this is the next thing we have to do. We have to process this film. We have to photograph this thing. We have to figure out what the pictures that are going into the people. You could lose yourself in the work that way.
And you said the negative disappeared. Did any of the photos ever reappear anywhere?
No. I have no idea what became of them. I had actually left The Guardian by 3 years later. I only found out when they asked me if I had any pictures at all that they could use for something like this, a commemoration of the event.
What are your thoughts? 30 years later, a lot of people say, well, we've had commission inquiries, but we still don't know, the full story. And some people feel we never really had, justice for what happened. What is your own feeling of it?
No, some of the people who died in that event never got justice. That's true enough. It was a social upheaval that I think at the time had to happen. I think it was extremely unfortunate that it did happen, but I don't know that there was a way to avoid that. I don't believe the country has been the same since then. The idea that you could shoot somebody down in the street and get away with it, in my own heartfelt estimation, I think took root then. I think a lot of our crime and a lot of our inability to grapple with crime and a lot of the hamstringing that's happened in our law enforcement has its roots back then. The police service was rendered neutered in that experience. The army took over. I think it was a humbling and humiliating experience for them. It's 30 years later. There's a whole new set of people in charge now. Lots of those people have retired since then. But I still feel that there is a sense that law enforcement in this country has been on the back foot ever since. They've been still trying to recover and take a lead and take a forceful position since then. Up until that moment, there was the sense that the police were in charge. And then after that, there was very clear understanding that it was possible for the police to not be in charge. And that's a really deeply troubling thing for our country to go through, I think.
Do you think something like this could happen again?
I have no idea. I think there are aggrieved people. I think there are people, in some ways, I think it's possible what we've been experiencing in terms of crime waves and so on is a kind of rolling experience of the same thing drawn out over almost 2 decades. We've lost a lot more people to senseless crime, murders, unexplained killings since then. I don't know that we can go back to what we were before, but I think we have to find a new way forward and a better understanding of the different classes that exist in this society, how they live together and how they don't live together, and finding a way to understand how we forge a modern nation out of those different interests. I think that's a really big challenge. I think it's something that is very much a social engagement. I don't believe it's really effective as a policing engagement, but it's a social engagement that we're still very much flirting with. We're not really fully engaging with it. We're not accepting the fact that there are people who live in this country who live a very different life from even people who are considered marginally privileged. And that's something that I think we still have to come to terms with. I have blathered for such a long time. I hope